I mean, obviously, it's incredible that a plot like this has managed to get to the stage where a presidential candidate, a former president, has actually been shot at. I mean, we shouldn't, kind of be under any illusions here. America is quite a dangerous place for political violence, and there has been, no doubt, a whole slew of assassination attempts or plots that were an earlier stage for many of those 43 years since President Reagan was actually shot in 1981. I think, what is shocking, of course, is that this time the shooter managed to get their shots off. The former president was actually hit, and you can see by the fact that he was bleeding how close he came to a disaster, and frankly, the US came to an absolute political disaster. Because had that assassination actually taken place, I would not want to think where we are right now politically and from a social cohesion point of view in America. Well, firstly, the question has to be asked, even before we get to this witness's point of view, how on earth was somebody able to get onto, a roof overlooking the rally, regardless of whether anyone had seen somebody with a rifle or not? This is now basic 101 for the Secret Service. It is, do not allow any access to any of the roofs on a place overlooking a political event which hosts one of the presidential candidates. I mean, this is basic stuff. So I think the Secret Service will have questions to answer about that, let alone the idea that somebody had actually, if you like, raised the warning, said there's somebody with a rifle on one of the roofs. And if that's the case, if that proves to be verified, then there are going to be big questions asked about what on earth was going on in that command structure of the Secret Service, which normally is so careful and so meticulous in protecting those who it's supposed to be protected with. And of course, the great fear would be that this starts a conspiracy theory along the lines of it was an inside job, they knew it was coming, along those lines. It almost certainly, of course, isn't that. It's almost certainly an error, just a security error. But the problem when you have stories like this circulating is that they're seized upon by those who want to take advantage of them in order to promote dark fantasies. And so what really will be important is to hear very quickly from Donald Trump himself a message of stability, of kind of safety firstly, but also that nobody should jump to any crazy conclusions, and that we need to get on with business as usual rather than turning this into some kind of political event. If a presidential candidate, somebody with a very high public profile, who's been a former president, is shot at and is hit, then I'm sorry to say that's a colossal failure from those protecting him, particularly if it is discovered that very basic security failures occurred, such as securing the perimeter and sights of view onto the stage. It's very difficult to work out how events like this actually play out in terms of a political campaign. Firstly, although we now have a name of the shooter, it is still very unclear what motivated him to attack former President Trump. So until that becomes clear, and it may never become clear, and already there's sort of conflicting political ideological issues that are coming up in his background. So it may well be that he is merely a sort of confused individual who sought to go down in history in some way, shape or form. If there was a political motive, that will obviously no doubt play out, and America won't like that. They won't like that somebody tried to silence one of the candidates, and that may well help him. If it's an unclear glory seeker, then it may have very little impact. But I think a lot depends actually on how Donald Trump plays it, as it were. I think so far he had incredible presence of mind, having been shot, to show defiance and to wave his fist in the air and basically say America, I'm not going to be derailed, America won't be derailed by things like this. That's a powerful image. That in itself is a powerful image of a strong leader who faces adversity and who will go through it and steer the country through. So if that becomes a defining image of this event, that could very well help Donald Trump's campaign. But it really is too early to look at that and to work out how the chips might fall. I think the reality is that if that does become the defining image, it's not simply something that his supporters will seize upon, but I'd imagine many neutral Americans, having seen a presidential candidate shot at, having seen him bleeding, having been very close to death, and his first reaction is not to cower and to run off the stage, but to kind of have the presence of mind to remind everyone watching that he is the man, as it were. That will play well. I think Americans like strong figures as presidents who are not frightened of threats, and who could well respond to other enemies in a similar way on a national level rather than simply on a personal level, saying, if you wound us, we won't kind of go down, as it were. We will stand up and fight back. I mean, I think the contrast between the imagery that President Biden has recently, if you like, beamed out to the American people, and Donald Trump's sort of strongman pose here could not be greater. I think even Biden's fans clearly recognise that he's heading towards older age, and as such is simply not as vigorous and as strong as he might have been a few years ago. And that's to take the charitable view. And on the other side, there are people who clearly don't think he's fit to be president anymore. Meanwhile, you have somebody who's not that much younger. Let's remember, Donald Trump is only 3 years younger, but who appears in contrast strong and vigorous and determined. Instead. And so I think that particular imagery is going to sort of have an impact on the race going further. That, iconic image of him shot, but still, blooded as it were, but unbowed. That is the image that when you contrast it with President Biden's first debate performance, is going to leave a lot of question marks in many Americans' minds who might have been thinking of voting for President Biden, but now may shift to go, look, he's got his problems, we all know that, but at the end of the day, he's a fighter. Donald Trump's a fighter, he'll fight for America, and maybe we need to give him another chance. So I suspect that contrast will become ever more glaring in the days to come. I'm sure some people will take any sign, to sort of draw any conclusion from it. If you're a person of faith, you might very well think that this is indeed a sign from God that he cannot be deterred, he cannot be stopped from his mission. But in reality, that group of people, the very religious Christian element in American politics, was already pretty much behind Donald Trump, and frankly had been prepared to acknowledge that he may have been a rather imperfect vessel for what they might wish, but that he still was the vessel they were going to support. And I don't think this will no doubt on some areas people will go, it's a sign from heaven. But I don't think actually that group is under any illusions about who Donald Trump is, but they do know that he will be supportive of their issues. And I think that's far more important than any sort of idea that he personally might be the chosen one, the anointed one, because as we know, his personal behavior is rather in contrast to what they believe. So, the phrase, the Lord works in mysterious ways, well, this may be one of them. But it's the biggest security failure when it comes to protecting people's of significance. I mean, obviously, things like 9/11 were bigger security failures. But, I mean, the reality of what's happened here is quite simple. And the USA has had a long history of political violence. It's a known factor. We've known for some time that, Donald Trump is a likely target for political violence. If you think about the tone of political debate, which he's obviously contributed to as well, the tone of political debate has become deeply polarized in the USA. Under such circumstances, when you have an attractive target to somebody, when you have a possibility this person is in the poll lead, might become the next president, you would expect a lot more from the Secret Service than what we seem to have seen, kind of overnight in the US. And as a result, I think big questions are going to be asked about what exactly happened here. How did a shooter get within that distance to be able to fire off clean shots towards a former president, a presidential candidate? Why would the Secret Service not on the perimeter? How would they not allowed this to be totally locked down? If there was a warning, why wasn't it taken seriously? All these questions do indeed point to a classic security failure, and indeed, of course, the most significant political security failure since the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan in 1981.